In a world increasingly shaped by technology, the HumanUp Imperative explores the significance of human connection with each other, with the communities we serve, and perhaps most importantly, with ourselves. Join Rex Wallace and his guests as they discuss the ever-important role of authentic, meaningful connection in healthcare. It's time to Human Up.
Hey everyone, welcome back. A few weeks ago, I got a message in my LinkedIn inbox from one of my contacts who I've met before and know casually, I would say, right, and follow on LinkedIn and like their posts, but don't know deeply. In the message that she sent was a link to a TEDx talk that she actually delivered. It was on a topic that she referenced the topic, and it was on something that resonated with me. I don't think I watched it immediately, but I watched it maybe the next day or a couple of days later. It wasn't very long, like 15 minutes long, and it did resonate. It hit me pretty hard, obviously, which is why we're here today. She probably had no idea when she sent it to her contacts on LinkedIn who it would resonate with and who it wouldn't. Kind of like this episode today, right? Like, I don't know how many of our listeners this topic will resonate with. I kind of hope it doesn't resonate with most of you, because it's not a fun topic, but it's a really, really important topic, and it's something we never talk about, which was sort of the whole point of her TEDx talk. So the topic is unacknowledged grief, and please join me as we human up with the person who sent that message, the person who delivered that talk, and the person that's here to talk to us today about unacknowledged grief, Dr. Saba Syed. Saba, thanks so much for joining. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Rex.
You bet. Yeah, thanks for being here. And it is a really important topic. And can you, maybe before we get into the topic itself, can you help some of our listeners know a little bit more about you, right? Can you kind of tell us who is Dr. Saba Syed?
Thanks, Rex. I am a pharmacist. I've been a pharmacist for 17 years and also a mom to two teenagers, one of whom is on the autism spectrum. And if you listen to the talk, you'll hear me discussing the whole experience of going through that autism diagnosis that I had with my son. Professionally, I've had a great opportunity to work across various pharmacy sectors and at 4 different startups as well. So I've really enjoyed following you, Rex, and all the information that your team puts out, because I'm really deep in the Medicare quality world, as well as in population health and managed care as well. Personally, I strongly believe in empathetic leadership and making sure we as leaders can show up in a way that is going to support our teams and understand some of these deeper things that may be happening in people's lives. So I really appreciate that you've started this podcast and you're talking about really the humanity that all of us bring into the workplace.
So can you talk a little bit about the TEDx talk and the topic and kind of how that came about?
Yeah, so I had always wanted to give a TEDx talk. That had been on my list of things that I've always wanted to do. Never really had the time. At the moment that I was thinking about applying for this talk, I was in the middle of a career transition. I had been recently laid off from a job, and that gave me some extra time to do some thinking about, hey, let me make a list of all the things that I've always wanted to do but never had the time to do. Right. And so this was one of those things that just happened to be on the list. I joined a webinar that was given in one of my networks, in the Chief Network, where the presenter was discussing, hey, this is how you set up your idea, this is how you give a talk. And he actually recommended going to a TEDx event. So I went to my first live TEDx event in January here in Houston. It was the TEDx Third Ward event, which was the inaugural event for that particular TEDx. And during that event, I was so inspired. The theme was dream, dare, do. And we kind of wrote on these little cards the things that we were going to dream or dare to do. And I met a TEDx coach there, and she was the one that was coaching all the TEDx speakers. And I was like, oh, this is, really, really great. Just happened to be the right series of events. So I ended up hiring her, and she supported me in my TEDx application process, submitting my idea. And that's really where we landed on this particular idea of being the one that I wanted to share with the world, because the whole point of TEDx is really the idea of what you're trying to share. And then it's an idea worth sharing. This was the one thing that I felt like I could contribute to the world. And I was thinking about, what do I want my legacy to be? I want my legacy to be empathy and kindness and understanding. And so that's kind of the angle that I was coming at with my TEDx.
And even in your talk, which was about unacknowledged grief, right? But you referenced another podcast from NPR. I actually listened to it this morning because I remember you referencing this. And
Yeah.
I guess the point is there aren't a lot of podcasts or a lot of discussions about this topic, right? And yeah, can you maybe talk about the topic and talk about? And I'll just let you. I'll just leave it to you. Like, what did you talk about? Can you kind of tee that up?
Yeah, so the NPR podcast that you were mentioning, Rex, it was about unacknowledged grief, and it came out during the pandemic, which I
Right.
think was the perfect time for something like that to come out, because a lot of people were grieving during that time and they just didn't know what to call it. So there is this concept of disenfranchised grief that Dr. Kenneth Doka, who's a grief expert, there's this whole field of grief experts that I kind of dived into as I was doing my research for this talk. I didn't even know this entire field existed, but there's an entire field of grief experts, and mostly dealing with death and dying. But there is this subpart of disenfranchised grief, which is specifically looking at a grief that is not openly acknowledged or supported by society, which is what makes it disenfranchised or unacknowledged, meaning it's not something that you see commonly in the public discourse, which is why you don't have podcasts about it, have people talking about it. But the feeling and the process that the people that are experiencing this type of grief is exactly the same as more traditional grief. So that was my hope with the TEDx talk, was to shine that light on this type of grief, so that people that were going through this experience or similar kind of experience wouldn't feel so alone and would know exactly what steps they needed to take in order to process their grief, the same way as folks that have traditional grief need to go through a process to process their grief.
And for anyone who hasn't watched your talk or studied about this at all, can you define unacknowledged grief and maybe give some examples of what this looks like? What is unacknowledged grief?
Yeah, so unacknowledged grief is a grief that society doesn't openly acknowledge or support, or AKA disenfranchised grief. So an example of that might be if, for example, you lose a job. Like I did, I was laid off, and so there's a grieving process that goes with that. If your child is diagnosed with a medical condition, that was the other grieving process that I went through when my son was diagnosed with autism, and that completely changed my entire world. And I was so sad, and I was going through a really difficult time, but it wasn't something that I felt like I could tell people about, and I didn't really know how to talk to people about it, because I had never seen anybody talking about it or discussing it in a way that resonated with me, that made sense to me. Another thing is, again, if you yourself are going through a medical diagnosis or a medical condition, you're going through a grieving process because your life is changing. All of this would be in death and dying. There are certain people that we're not allowed to grieve, or certain types of people who are not allowed to grieve either. So, for example, if you are divorced and your ex-spouse dies, that's also a disenfranchised grief. Like obviously felt a love for that person at some point, and if they pass away, these ex-spouses are not even allowed to be at the funerals, for example, and their grief is disregarded. So that was another example that Dr. Doka talked about in his book, and as examples. And the last one that I'll mention is people that have intellectual disabilities as well are often, people think that they don't need to grieve, or they just don't understand, or they shield them from certain things, and that's not fair to them. These are people that do need to grieve as well, and we do need to allow them to have that space to grieve. So that type of grief is also unacknowledged. So it's a whole range of things, and I was surprised to learn that there were so many different ways that people can be experiencing this unacknowledged or disenfranchised grief, and not enough people are talking about it.
Right. There's sort of a, maybe stigma is the wrong word, but definitely, people don't want to talk about it, right? Who are experiencing it, but they need to talk about it is the key.
Yeah.
And you said some really important things in your in your TEDx talk, and so in the disenfranchised grief podcast too, about this is it's a loss. It's not openly acknowledged, obviously, since we're talking unacknowledged grief, but also it's not socially mourned or publicly supported. And you gave some great examples in your talk of saying, I think you said, what happens when the thing you're grieving is not a death, right? It's just a different life than what you expected or expected for your child, and how no one's bringing you a casserole, right? Like that really hit me. I'm from the South, right? And this is it's just it's such a ritual that happens as a way of public mourning and social mourning and support in helping someone grieve a loss that's known, right? But when that loss is not a death, but it's just a medical condition, or and people, none of us are immune to this, right? I have this, which is why it resonated with me. And the unacknowledged grief in my life is with my kids. I have 4 kids, and being a dad is the most important thing I ever wanted to be. And through a few hard years of marital separation and then a divorce in 2019, right before COVID hit, um, 3 of my 4 kids estranged from me, and two completely, and one wants to have a relationship, but only a virtual relationship. So we have a call like this, right? I haven't seen him in person in over 5 years now, and he's 17, right? So, or 18. So incredibly hard, right? And kind of affects everything. It impacts every aspect of life, just like yours does, just like these other examples that we're talking about that people don't see. But anytime, if I'm on social media or if I'm talking to friends and they're talking about their kids, and then they ask me about hey, how are your kids? Are they are they in school? And like I just kind of freeze up sometimes, or don't know what to say, or just completely change the topic, because it's hard to talk about. And honestly, I don't even know what they're doing. I don't know where they are sometimes or what they're doing. So it is so hard when those most important relationships in your entire life are not right. They're for many reasons. It impacts your whole quality of life. So not to like switch the podcast to me, but just to show no one's immune to this, right? And people
Absolutely.
that you think might have it all together. I'm sure there are some people who mistakenly think I have it all together. They would be really wrong. And and I don't think anybody does, right? So with that, let's talk about. But there's two places I want to go with you in this conversation. One is sort of the human aspect of people dealing with unacknowledged grief, the person actually experiencing it, and giving them support and encouraging them. And you had such a great kind of 4-letter acronym on like steps to take if you are in that position. And then I also want to go to, if you are a leader of a team or an organization, right? And you, like, what are the signs you need to be watching for to see someone who might be experiencing this, and what could you do to help, right? It's not easy. They don't always want to talk about it, but let's start on the first one first, right? And maybe talk about your 4-letter acronym, if you can revisit that. If
Yeah.
someone's going through unacknowledged grief, what are some steps they can take to help?
Yeah, so the acronym is ASMR, and the steps associated with that are A, acknowledge the loss, acknowledge the grief, which is the most difficult and life-changing step in unacknowledged grief. I didn't even give myself permission to grieve when I received my son's autism diagnosis, and part of it was I didn't know I was allowed to. And so I feel like that acknowledgement, giving yourself permission to go through a grieving process, is like step number 1, right? Like if we don't even realize that we're grieving or giving ourselves that permission, then we're not going to be able to go through the rest of the steps. And the S is seeking support. Even though it's very hard and the social denial of it makes it even harder to do, you still need to try. And it's one of the things that was really hard for me as well, because I felt like I needed to suffer in silence. I needed to just do what I needed to do to get done for myself or for my kids. And there wasn't really any kind of social aspect involved in this type of grief, but create it for yourself, even though it's hard, whether you're reaching out to a friend who you know and you trust, or family, or even a therapist. Like I've been to therapy. It's super helpful. And you can get that support from, if you don't have people in your network, if you don't have family or friends that really you feel like are going to be supportive, then you can seek professional help as well.
Right.
And then M is, sorry.
Can I interrupt you there? Because and just pause there just for a second, because it takes me back to the NPR podcast too, where he said, especially in the West, right? And I think maybe the host I think came from India and had, and deals with grief in a whole different way, in a much healthier way in the East than we do here. But his point was, we have this misguided culture of strength in the West. We're not good at grieving, but strength is found in authenticity. Right. So being exactly what you're saying, like acknowledge it and seek support, like ask for support. Most of us suck at this. I suck at this, right? Like the only person in my life that I talk regularly to about this issue is my therapist that I see, regularly. So, even my significant other, even my sister and brother, right? And close friends don't really ask about this. They know how hard it is, and I think they don't want to, right? And I don't necessarily blame them, but yeah, it, like, for us to, like, the challenge is for us that are going through it also to seek that support, right? So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I think on the other end of it, people that are receiving the information also don't know what to say. So I have like so many stories about that where they just kind of like stare at me, or they start jumping into solutioning, or they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and they just have this like pity instead of, and sympathy instead of empathy. And so that could be a whole other TED talk, I feel like, is, as a person receiving this information, what is useful to the other person on what they would like, for how they would like you to support them, right? And I think us as people that are seeking support can also be a little bit clearer as well. Like, hey, I'm sharing this information with you. All I need is a listening ear. Like, I don't need advice. I don't need sympathy. I don't need pity. I just want someone to empathize with me and be here for me and listen to me. And that's what I needed at that time, but I didn't know how to ask for that.
And maybe bring a casserole, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the last two steps here are the M and the R. So the M is the mourning. So mourning is an outward expression of grief. So whatever it is you need to do to get it out is what the mourning is. So whether you're crying, whether you're talking to someone about it, whether you're writing about it, whether you're creating art, creating music, whatever it is that supports you in expressing yourself, that's what mourning is about. So I've kind of done like all of the above, right? Like I've talked to people about it, I've written about it, and try to like take what I had going on in my head and put it in my journal. So I wrote poems. So whatever it is that supports you and your mourning process is something that will help as you process your grief. And the last part is R, which is creating and completing a ritual. So the social aspect of mourning, typically when someone passes away, there's a funeral, people get together, there's a whole ritual associated with that. And there's been a lot of scientific research on this, that this does actually help support us as we're going through a grieving process. So think about what is a ritual for you that would be supportive for you. So that looks like different things to different people. But for me, it was writing a poem or reflecting every year on my son's birthday and thinking about our journey and reflecting on our journey and taking some intentional time to see where I am now and where I was before and all the things we still have left to do. And it's supported me a lot in my processing, but everybody's different. So I've seen different kinds of rituals. Like I was invited to my friend who was recently divorced. She invited me over. We kind of did a ritual for her around her divorce. And that was the first time I'd ever been to something like that. But it was a way for us to gather together and acknowledge and kind of, provide a way to additionally process that experience or that grief.
This topic of rituals, it's interesting to me, and I want to dig into this more, not right now, but just personally, because I think with your situation and my situation both, right, and many of these other examples of unacknowledged grief, it's so different than, and I just, death or even a job loss where on something where there is definite closure, right? With the death, our ritual is to have a funeral or celebration of life, and sometimes it's really important for it to be an open casket so you can actually see the person and right and have closure and know that they're not here anymore. With a job loss, obviously that job is gone and you have to move on. So you can mourn the actual loss of that thing that no longer is here. But when it's something like a medical condition or an estrangement that you hope will someday end, right, or change and evolve into a relationship again, like you don't want closure, or you know what I mean, there's
Yeah.
nothing to put closure on to have. So the ritual feels different, and I'm sure there are things, and maybe, I mean, you will obviously, like some of the things you talked about for yourself would be helpful, but it's just so different than, it's not really closure, right? Which is part of the
No,
ritual of a death or a job loss or something like that.
it's not. And I think similarly to people who go through a traditional grieving process, like you're never really truly done grieving. So
Yeah.
I think that's like a misconception, right? That hey, you go through the stages of grief, it's linear, and then you're done, right? Like that's not even for people that go through a traditional grieving process. Obviously the feelings are very intense in the beginning, but they're still around, right? Like there's still a hole there in your life, and there's still a person that you're missing, and they're no longer there. And I think similarly with these unacknowledged griefs, yes, you're initially hit by this event and it's seismic and it's impacting you in so many different ways, and you need to process that in the moment, but there's this continual need to do processing all throughout your life. And so for me, I'm constantly processing, right? Like there's, like you mentioned, sometimes, especially in the very very beginning when I first got my son's autism diagnosis, it was really hard for me to be on social media and see all of my kids posting about their kids and neurotypical kids and all the things that they were doing, and being involved in all these activities and doing so well in sports and all this stuff. And that would make me sad because I would compare and I would know this is something my son is not able to do and may never be able to do, right? Like they would say, oh, my kid has told me this today, or they talked about this today, and they would complain about it, and I'd be like, at least your kid talks to you, right? And so then I would catch on to some of these things like, well, I'm starting to sound bitter now, and I need to step away, right? Like this is not healthy for me, and I need to make sure that I'm in a place that I can still see this information and not feel upset and sad about it. And that's when I know I'm ready to come back to it. So there's certain situations where you do need more time to process certain things, or you need to give yourself that space to process that on your own, and then you can come back and re-engage in certain kinds of things. So for me, I'm constantly processing. Like this year, my son is graduating high school, and so we went to have his senior portraits taken. I'm proud of him, but then also part of me is really sad because, other parents that are having these bittersweet moments for their kids, they're like, you're graduating, you're going off to college, you're going to go drive, you're going to do these amazing things, but he's not going to go to college. He's not going to have a driver's license. He doesn't drive. Like there's just all of these things that he should be doing at this age, but he's not. He even had a really hard time getting the pictures taken because they're telling him to smile and he makes like this really weird. So we had to cut the session short because I was like, we're not getting really good pictures. And so that was really sad as well. So there's always moments where you're having to process different things. And so I don't necessarily think you're like one and done, as you mentioned, Rex. There's always a situation where you're going to need to do some processing.
And what if you're so let's pivot to, if you're a leader in an organization or a leader of a team, what are some signs that people around you might be experiencing unacknowledged grief?
Yeah, I would say when I was leading a team, it was important for me to be authentic, to your point, Rex. Like we want to bring our true selves to work in a way that's not oversharing, of course. But I think when people saw that, hey, Saba's got this child on the spectrum and she's openly talking about it, and she's openly telling people, hey, sign up for the employee assistant program or talk to a therapist. I'm being open about it, and I'm taking days off for my kid, and I'm logging off early. that is modeling these healthy actions and behaviors for your team and creating a culture where it's okay to do these things versus that more of that hustle culture, right? That's very common, or where people feel like they can't talk about these things at work. So I would say number one is, as a leader, showing up in a way that you're authentic and you're empathetic and people can see who you are as a person and can relate to that. That gives people that permission to then do that themselves. So I think without that psychological safety and without people understanding that it's okay for them to have, life situations and not have it be used against them, they're not going to be willing to share, and it'd be really difficult for you to know if anybody's going through a difficult time, right? You would need to set up your relationship with your team in a way that they feel comfortable sharing things if they're going through a difficult time. And it's not necessary that they have to. So that's the other part, Rex. Like, you as a leader have to respect their privacy, because there's certain things that they may not want to share, they may not be ready to share, and that's okay, right? As long as we can direct them to resources that you have within your company, and understanding those resources is another thing that I've always spent a lot of time on as a leader. Is what tools do we have available? What is our medical benefit cover? What's our behavioral health benefit? What is the employee assistance program, or similar kinds of programs that are available? So just understanding that inside and out, and even using them yourselves, right? Just so you can learn the whole process and you can help guide and direct your team. Is really helpful, because whenever we did go through difficult times, I would pull up that information again and be like, hey, here's the information, contact this EAP, call this number, you can sign up for the app, this is how you do it, I've done it as well, I've used it as well. And just taking some of that stigma away from it does really help.
I think those are great. When Steph and I were talking about this episode after you agreed to be on, he stumbled upon a social media post from some influencer saying that arguing that we should not be authentic at work, because it was a flaw. It was something we shouldn't do because it would prevent us from, basically making the point that people that get promoted are not people who are authentic, but people who just, I don't know, like just play the corporate game, right? And don't be their authentic selves. I totally disagree with that, but at the same time, I can understand, I can understand someone arguing that. I don't think it's best. I don't think it's healthy, but I'm not everyone. The post had quite a few likes. Obviously, a lot of people thought, yeah, that's probably true, right? What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are in whatever authentic process that you're going through, right? Like, if for me, right when I was diagnosed, or while I was immediately going through a divorce, or like in those exact moments, I was probably a little bit too sensitive
Sure.
to share that information publicly. I was still trying to figure out what was going on with me, right? So I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing that at work. And so I think there's a difference between being authentic and needing to share everything immediately. That's personal. It's not the same thing, right? So being authentic is you showing up as the version of yourself that you would like to show and share to the world, right? If there's something that's private that you want to keep private, that's perfectly fine. When you're being inauthentic, that means that you're showing a version of yourself that's not true to you. And I don't think anybody would be happy in a way doing that, or masking at work, or having to like fit into a certain kind of mold because you think that's what people want you to be, or you think that's what you need to do in order to succeed. It's just, that's very, very exhausting. And as someone that's, a person of color and a woman, and someone that's usually the only person that looks like me in a certain space, I can tell you that's very, very exhausting.
For sure.
So I would rather be the authentic version of myself that I would like to put out into the world, and who I would like to model as a leader for my team, so that they feel comfortable showing up as the version of themselves, that however that looks like to them, how they would like to show up. But I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of workplaces, they do not appreciate when people are showing an aspect of themselves that's against the norm. And so we need to make it okay for people to find their community and be okay with expressing themselves as who they are.
I love that answer. I think that's such a good answer, and it makes me kind of reframe it in my mind around what does it mean to be authentic? Because and when I was saying authentic, I wasn't really defining it, but I feel like I'm pretty authentic at work with my team, but much of my team has no idea that about my issue that creates unacknowledged grief. I obviously don't talk about it a lot. I have talked about it before, but not recently. So our newer people have no idea, and nor do they necessarily. I don't need to like overshare. So I think, but the way you phrased all of that, I think is really important. I think you can be authentic without oversharing, without making other people uncomfortable. But being yourself and not being fake and not being what you think the corp maybe needs you to be. So I just think that's a really good answer. If we so I want to pivot into some rapid fire questions that I ask every guest, but before that, just
Okay.
one last question. If you could give one piece of advice to someone listening who is carrying grief that no one sees, what would you tell them?
I would say the first step is giving yourself that permission to grieve is the most important step. So you're not alone. You're not the only one that's experiencing this. And for me, my aha moment was after I listened to that NPR podcast and they put a name to this, experience that I had. I was like, oh, I'm not the only one. And it has a name and there's other people that are going through this too. And just, it's okay to be sad, right? It's okay to grieve whatever that loss is. And give yourself that permission to do that, and find your support, seek your people out, find a way or a community or a therapist or whoever that's gonna support you as you process this grief. I think that what happens to us a lot of the time is we're kind of stuck on our own thinking we're by ourselves and we're the only ones that are experiencing this, and we just start being more lonely, and that actually ends up intensifying these grief emotions even more because of the fact that we're isolating ourselves and we're kind of wallowing in our grief and not processing it. So in order to move forward and move on with our lives in a healthy way, you're never going to get rid of this grief. It's going to be there, but processing it does support you in that healthy way of being able to then acknowledge what you have and move forward and have ways to still continue living a really productive life.
Good guidance. Okay, let's pivot to some other questions. So first, what's one book that everyone should read?
Well, there's a book and then also an HBR article by Clayton Christensen. So the book is How Will You Measure Your Life? And there's a similar HBR article that aligns with that, which was very life-changing for me when I read it as a new leader. So I definitely recommend that one.
I know his name. I've read something else from him, but I can't think of what it is. Okay, great. We'll definitely look that one up. What was your most helpful personal failure?
It's not necessarily a personal failure, but I do think going through this experience of my son's autism diagnosis and processing the grief associated with that has turned me into a better person. I would not be who I am today without this experience and without going through what I went through with my son. I am a lot more understanding. I'm more empathetic. I'm more patient. There's so many things about me that are better because of him and because he's in my life.
Yeah, these things have a way of helping you kind of become a better version of yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's a belief that you swear by?
For me, I really believe that kindness and empathy are never the wrong answer. So that's one thing. The second thing I believe and swear by is be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Just from my experiences working at startups and trying new things and growing through these difficult experiences, those are the two.
And we'll actually end with this actually. So how would you finish this sentence? For me, one of the most important ways to human up is to
be empathetic and kind.
Yeah, that's a good one. Anything we missed? Anything that I didn't ask that you feel like that you really want to say or share?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you for having me on to talk about this topic. My whole goal with my TED Talk was to shine a light on this and to let
Mission
people
accomplished.
know that they're not alone, right? And
Yeah.
if they are going through something like this, there's a path forward and there's a way to process your grief and do that in a way that's going to support you for your mental health. So I truly appreciate you having me on. The last thing I would like to say is that I do have my own coaching business as well that I started this year while I was in transition as well. And so one of the tenets of my career coaching is allowing you to be that authentic version of yourself. And so we do really dig into finding out who you are as a person, what your values are, what motivates you, what makes you happy and excited to come to work. And so I do work with my clients one-on-one on their professional and their career development. So if folks are interested in that, I am accepting coaching clients as well.
That's great. And we will, when we post this and post snippets on LinkedIn, we'll tag you in your LinkedIn profile so they can find you there.
Awesome. Yes.
If anyone's looking for you or wants to follow you, is that kind of the main place, or anything else you want to reference?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is a great place to reach out to me, connect with me. I accept pretty much all people that connect or send me messages. I also have a website, drsabasyed.com, where I have all of my details on my coaching services. And then I'm also on other social media platforms as well, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube.
Great. Okay. Hey, thanks so much for joining. Seriously, this was an important topic, and it was a helpful conversation for me to have. Hopefully, again, I guess, kind of hopefully it won't resonate with a lot of people because they're not going through this, but most likely a lot more people than we think are definitely going through this in some fashion, right? And I do think it'll be helpful for them to hear. So yeah, Saba, thanks so much for joining. Everyone, thanks for listening. We will talk next time.
Thank you, Rex, for having me.
Thanks.